I never thought a snowstorm would be the thing to finally break an HOA. But here we are. My name is Quentin Lancaster, and I've lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 8 years. It's one of those planned communities where every house looks vaguely similar. The lawns are measured with rulers, and the homeowners association treats the covenant like it's the Constitution and the 10 Commandments rolled into one. Most of the time, I kept my head down, paid my dues, and ignored the occasional passive-aggressive notice about my mailbox not being the approved shade of black. That all changed last December when Eleanor Whitmore became HOA president. Eleanor was everything you'd expect from someone who dedicate their entire existence to policing their neighbors. She was 52, drove a white Lexus SUV that she washed twice a week, and had that particular haircut that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager," from 3 blocks away. She'd been on the board for years, but when old Mr. Henderson retired and moved to Florida, she swooped in like a hawk spotting a field mouse. The trouble started on a Wednesday morning in early December. I was getting ready for work, drinking my coffee and watching the news talk about an approaching nor'easter, when I heard the doorbell. I opened it to find Eleanor standing there with her clipboard, her breath forming little clouds in the freezing air. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm here about the fire hydrants." I blinked at her. "What about them?" She gestured toward the street where 2 red fire hydrants sat on either side of our cul-de-sac. According to township ordinance and our HOA covenant, homeowners are responsible for keeping fire hydrants clear of snow and debris within their property zones. "Okay," I said slowly. "It hasn't snowed yet. I'm providing advance notice." She pulled a piece of paper from her clipboard and thrust it at me. "The storm is expected to drop 12 to 18 inches starting Friday night. I expect all hydrants to be cleared within 24 hours of snowfall cessation." I took the paper, scanning it quickly. It was a formal notice citing some township code I'd never heard of and a section of the HOA covenant that I certainly didn't remember from when I bought the house. "Eleanor, I work long hours. I'll get to it when I can." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't optional, Mr. Lancaster. It's a safety issue and a legal requirement. Failure to comply will result in fines of $100 per day until the violation is corrected." $100 per day. I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "That's correct. The covenant is very clear." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and you're responsible for both hydrants on your property zone, not just the one directly in front of your house." She walked away before I could argue, leaving me standing in my doorway holding a notice that threatened to drain my bank account over snow removal. I looked at the hydrants. One was directly across from my house, about 15 feet into the street. The other was at the corner where our cul-de-sac met the main road, technically closer to my property line than my neighbor Jerry's, but barely. I called Jerry that evening. He'd gotten the same notice. "It's ridiculous," Jerry said over the phone. He was a contractor who'd lived in Meadowbrook for 12 years. "I've never cleared those hydrants specifically. I do my driveway, the sidewalk, maybe some of the street if I'm feeling generous, but this is the first time anyone's made it a formal requirement." Did we actually agree to this when we bought our houses? Buried in page 47 of the covenant, probably. You know how these things are. Listen, my advice. Just do it. Eleanor's going to be a nightmare if you don't, and $100 a day adds up fast. I hung up feeling frustrated but resigned. The storm hit Friday night as predicted, and by Sunday morning we had 16 inches of heavy, wet snow covering everything. I spent 3 hours Sunday afternoon clearing my driveway, my sidewalk, my front walk, and then trudging out to dig out both fire hydrants. My back was screaming by the time I finished, and my hands were numb despite my gloves. Monday morning, I got another doorbell ring. Eleanor again, this time with her phone out, taking pictures. "Mr. Lancaster, this is unacceptable." I stared at her. "What are you talking about? I cleared both hydrants yesterday, not to the required specifications." She showed me her phone screen, displaying a photo of the hydrant near the corner. There must be a 3-foot clearance radius around the entire hydrant, and the snow must be removed, not just pushed to the side where it could refreeze and create an obstruction. I looked at the photo. She was right that I'd pushed some snow to the side, but there was still plenty of clearance. "Eleanor, I spent 3 hours out there in freezing weather. The hydrant is perfectly accessible. The township code specifies 3 feet, and I will be measuring." She typed something on her phone. "Consider this your official warning. You have until tomorrow morning to correct the deficiency, or the fines begin." She left, and I stood there feeling my blood pressure rise. I called into work, told them I'd be late, and spent another hour properly clearing around both hydrants to Eleanor's exacting standards. I took photos with my phone for documentation, complete with a tape measure showing the clearance. Tuesday, no doorbell. Wednesday, no doorbell. I started to think maybe I'd satisfied her requirements. Then Thursday morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Inside was a formal notice of violation and a bill for $200, covering Monday and Tuesday's non-compliance period. According to Eleanor's documentation, my initial clearance hadn't met standards, so I owed fines for those 2 days before I'd corrected it. I immediately emailed the HOA board, disputing the fine. I got a response from Eleanor within an hour. Dispute denied. Payment due within 30 days or additional late fees will apply. That weekend, I did some research. I pulled out my covenant documents, found the section she'd cited, and read it carefully. She was technically correct about the requirement, but the language was vague about what constituted proper clearance. I also looked up the township ordinance. It existed, but it didn't specify the 3-foot radius she kept mentioning. That was apparently an HOA addition. I also found something interesting. In the covenant, right after the section about fire hydrant maintenance, there was a section about common area maintenance. Meadowbrook Estates had several common areas: a small playground, a retention pond, a gazebo near the entrance, and a utility area behind the community center that housed the emergency backup generator for the neighborhood street lights and the community center itself. The covenant stated that homeowners adjacent to common areas were responsible for maintaining reasonable access to those areas, including snow removal from pathways. The utility area was accessible by a service road that ran between my property and Jerry's property. Technically, according to the property survey I'd received when I bought the house, that service road was partially on my land, part of an easement I'd granted to the HOA. I'd always cleared that service road in winter because it was easier to do it while I was doing my driveway. The road ran right along my property line, and I could clear it with my snowblower in about 10 minutes. But according to the covenant's exact wording, I was only required to maintain reasonable access, not necessarily clear it to the same standards Eleanor was demanding for the hydrants. An idea started forming. The following Tuesday, we got hit with another storm, this one dropping 10 inches overnight. I woke up early Wednesday morning and cleared my driveway, my sidewalk, and both fire hydrants to Eleanor's exact specifications. 3-foot radius, snow removed completely, not pushed aside. I took photos and measurements. Then I went inside, made breakfast, and got ready for work. I did not touch the service road. It wasn't spite exactly. It was more like a test. If Eleanor wanted to enforce every tiny detail of the covenant when it came to fire hydrants, then surely she'd notice that the service road to the emergency generator wasn't being maintained. And if she noticed, she'd have to acknowledge that I'd been going above and beyond my actual covenant requirements by clearing it all these years. Thursday morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Eleanor stood there, red-faced despite the cold. "Why haven't you cleared the service road?" I sipped my coffee. "Good morning, Eleanor. I've been focused on ensuring the fire hydrants meet your standards. The service road needs to be cleared. The generator needs to be accessible. According to the covenant, I'm responsible for maintaining reasonable access. The road is still passable." "It's just not cleared." Her jaw tightened. "Mr. Lancaster, that generator provides emergency power to the entire neighborhood. What if there's a power outage? Then I imagine the HOA will handle it since it's common area equipment." I kept my voice pleasant. "I'm not refusing to clear it eventually. I'm just prioritizing the hydrants like you've insisted. This is ridiculous. You've always cleared that road." "As a courtesy, yes. But given the strict enforcement of covenant requirements lately, I thought I should focus on my actual obligations." "The hydrants are clear. The pathway to the generator is still accessible, just not cleared. That meets the reasonable access standard in Section 12, subsection 4. Eleanor's face went from red to purple. "I'll have the board discuss this." "You do that." I closed the door, heart pounding. I wasn't naturally confrontational, but something about her attitude had pushed me past my tolerance. That evening, I got an email from the HOA board calling an emergency meeting for Saturday morning. The subject line read, "Service Road Maintenance Discussion." All homeowners were invited to attend. Saturday morning was cold and clear. I drove to the community center at 9 a.m. and found about 30 people already there, which was unusual. Most HOA meetings attracted maybe 8 or 10 residents, usually the same busybodies who lived for this stuff. But word had apparently spread about some kind of confrontation between me and Eleanor. Eleanor stood at the front of the room with the other board members. Patricia Morrison, the secretary, and Dennis Kowalski, the treasurer. Patricia was a retired teacher in her 60s who generally seemed reasonable. Dennis was a CPA who mostly cared about the budget and nothing else. "Let's begin," Eleanor announced, banging a gavel that seemed excessive. "We're here to discuss the ongoing maintenance issue regarding the service road to the utility area." She launched into a presentation, complete with printed photos of the snow-covered service road. She made it sound like I'd committed some cardinal sin by not clearing it, throwing around words like safety hazard and community negligence and covenant violation. When she finally paused for breath, I raised my hand. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Would you like to explain yourself?" I stood up. "Happy to. I've cleared that service road every winter for 8 years as a courtesy, even though the covenant only requires me to maintain reasonable access. The road is still passable. It's not plowed, but someone could walk or drive through it if necessary." "The generator needs to be serviced regularly," Eleanor interrupted. "Then the HOA can arrange to have it plowed. It's HOA equipment on HOA common property. I've been doing it as a favor." I pulled out my phone and brought up the photos I'd taken. Meanwhile, I've been cited for not clearing fire hydrants to exact specifications that aren't even in the township code. I've been fined $200 for violations that were marginal at best. So I've chosen to prioritize the requirements that you, Eleanor, have deemed most important. A murmur went through the crowd. Jerry caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Patricia Morrison spoke up. Eleanor, did you actually fine him $200 for the hydrant issue? He was in violation of the covenant, Eleanor said defensively. The fines are standard, but the hydrants were cleared, Patricia said. I drove by his house that Monday. I saw them. Not to specifications. Dennis Kowalski cleared his throat. What specifications? The covenant just says hydrants need to be kept clear. It doesn't define clearance measurements. Eleanor's face flushed. The township code requires 3 feet. No, it doesn't, I said. I looked it up. The township code requires hydrants to be accessible to emergency personnel. The 3-foot radius is something you added. The murmuring got louder. I saw several neighbors pulling out their phones, presumably looking up the actual ordinance. Eleanor tried to regain control. Regardless, the service road needs to be maintained. Mr. Lancaster has been doing it for years. And I'm happy to continue doing it, I said calmly, once we establish some reasonable standards for covenant enforcement. If I'm going to be fined $100 a day for pushing snow 6 inches to the left instead of hauling it away completely, then I need to focus my time and energy on those precise requirements. I can't do everything to impossible standards. They're not impossible, Eleanor snapped. Then you do them, someone called from the back. It was Sarah Chen, a lawyer who lived 3 houses down from me. Eleanor, if these standards are so reasonable, why don't you clear the service road yourself? You live closest to the utility area. Eleanor sputtered. That's not my responsibility. Actually, Sarah said, standing up with her own phone in hand. According to the property surveys, the service road easement runs across 4 properties: Quentin's, Jerry's, yours, and the Davidsons. If we're going to enforce covenant maintenance requirements strictly, shouldn't all 4 property owners be responsible? I hadn't known that. I'd always assumed it was just my property because the road ran so close to my driveway. But Sarah was a real estate attorney, and if she said the easement covered 4 properties, I believed her. Eleanor looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. The covenant specifically assigns maintenance to adjacent homeowners. Right, homeowners plural, Sarah said, not just Quentin. So why is he the only one being called out for this? Patricia Morrison flipped through a binder in front of her. Eleanor, did you send notices to all 4 property owners about the service road? Mr. Lancaster has always handled it, Eleanor said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. That doesn't answer the question, Patricia said. Her teacher voice was coming through now, firm but not unkind. If you're going to enforce the covenant, you need to enforce it consistently. Either all adjacent homeowners are responsible for that service road, or the HOA needs to handle it as common area maintenance. Dennis Kowalski leaned forward. How much would it cost to hire a plow service for the service road? That's not the point, Eleanor said. Actually, it's exactly the point, Dennis replied. If we're talking about HOA responsibilities versus homeowner responsibilities, I need to know the budget implications. A plow service for that small stretch would probably run, what, $50 per storm? That's manageable. The meeting devolved into arguments about budget allocations and covenant interpretations. After an hour, Patricia called for a vote on 2 motions. First, to rescind my $200 fine for the hydrant situation. Second, to allocate HOA funds for professional snow removal on the service road going forward. Both motions passed, 2-1. Eleanor voted against both, but she was outvoted. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but also exhausted. I'd won the battle, but I had a sinking feeling the war was just beginning. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more notices from Eleanor. One cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. Another claimed my mailbox post was leaning and needed to be repaired. The third said my front door wreath was seasonally inappropriate because I'd left my Christmas wreath up into mid-January. Each notice threatened fines. Each one was technically based on some obscure covenant provision, and each one was clearly retaliation. I wasn't the only one. Jerry got cited for parking his work truck in his driveway overnight, something he'd done for 12 years without issue. Sarah Chen got a notice about her vegetable garden being visible from the street, allegedly violating the aesthetic standards section of the covenant. Even Patricia Morrison, who'd voted against Eleanor at the meeting, got cited for having a lawn ornament that exceeded the height restrictions. The neighborhood was turning into a police state, and Eleanor was the dictator. The final straw came in late January. We got another significant snowfall, about 8 inches overnight on a Wednesday. I got up early Thursday morning and spent 2 hours clearing everything to Eleanor's standards. Driveway, sidewalk, front walk, both fire hydrants with 3-foot clearances all around. I was tired, cold, and running late for work, but I'd done it. Friday morning, I woke up to find a notice on my door. Another fine, this time for $300. According to Eleanor, I'd damaged HOA property while clearing snow. She claimed I'd thrown snow onto the common area grass strip between the sidewalk and the street, and that constituted improper disposal of snow and ice. I stood in my doorway, reading the notice 3 times, trying to comprehend the level of absurdity. Where exactly was I supposed to put the snow? My yard was already piled high. The street was full. The only place left was that grass strip, which everyone in the neighborhood used for snow disposal. I took photos of the grass strip in front of every house on my street. Every single one had snow piled on it. Then I got in my car and drove around the entire neighborhood, documenting the same thing everywhere. Nobody was being cited except me. That evening, I called a lawyer. Not Sarah Chen, since she was also being targeted by Eleanor, but a friend of a friend who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Michelle Torres, and she had a reputation for eating HOA boards for breakfast. Michelle listened to my story, asked for copies of all my notices and documentation, and then laughed. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. "Mr. Lancaster, you have a slam-dunk harassment case here. Selective enforcement, retaliatory fines, and citations for behaviors that are clearly standard throughout the community. I can bury them. What do you recommend? Let me send a letter to the board. Sometimes that's enough to make them back off. If not, we file a formal complaint and possibly pursue a lawsuit for harassment and breach of fiduciary duty. How much will this cost me? Initial letter, $500. If we file suit, we're looking at a few thousand, but we'll seek to recover attorney fees from the HOA. Given the documentation you have, I'm confident we'd win." I authorized the letter. Michelle sent it the following Monday, addressed to the full HOA board with copies to Eleanor personally. It was 5 pages of legal terminology that boiled down to, "Stop harassing my client or face legal consequences." The response came faster than I expected. Tuesday evening, I got a phone call from Patricia Morrison. "Quentin, it's Patricia from the HOA board. Do you have a minute?" "Sure," I said cautiously. "I want to apologize. Dennis and I were not aware of the extent of the notices Eleanor has been sending out. We only see the ones that go to official board votes, and she's been issuing a lot of these on her own authority as president." "Can she do that?" "Technically, for minor violations, yes, but she's been abusing that authority. After receiving your attorney's letter, Dennis and I did an audit of all notices issued since Eleanor became president. It's extensive and almost entirely targeted at people who have opposed her or questioned her decisions." "So, what happens now?" Patricia sighed. We're calling a special board election. Dennis and I are moving to remove Eleanor as president and potentially from the board entirely. We need homeowner votes to make it happen, but given how many people she's been targeting, I don't think we'll have trouble getting support. When's the election? 2 weeks from Saturday. We'll send out formal notices and ballots. In the meantime, Dennis and I are suspending all pending fines issued by Eleanor pending board review. That includes yours. What about Eleanor? Is she going to retaliate? She doesn't have unilateral authority to do anything significant. Dennis and I have to co-sign any major decisions. We're essentially freezing her out until the election. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate you looking into this. It's our responsibility. This isn't what an HOA is supposed to be. We're supposed to maintain property values and community standards, not wage personal vendettas. The next 2 weeks were relatively quiet. Eleanor sent out a neighborhood email defending her actions and claiming Patricia and Dennis were staging a coup. But it was too little, too late. Sarah Chen, Jerry, and several other neighbors organized a campaign to vote Eleanor out, complete with printed flyers outlining all the ridiculous citations she'd issued. The election was held at the community center on a Saturday morning. Turnout was massive, probably 80% of the neighborhood. I'd never seen so many people engaged in HOA business. Eleanor stood at the front of the room looking defiant while Patricia explained the voting procedure. The ballots were simple, 3 questions. First, should Eleanor Whitmore be removed as HOA president? Second, should she be removed from the board entirely? Third, who should serve as the new president? The vote wasn't even close. Eleanor was removed as president by a vote of 87 to 12. She was removed from the board entirely by a vote of 79 to 20. Patricia Morrison was elected as the new president almost unanimously. Eleanor stood up during the announcement of results, her face red and her hands shaking. "This is illegal," she announced. "You can't remove a board member without cause." Sarah Chen stood up. "Actually, we can. The covenant allows for removal of board members by a 2/3 majority vote of homeowners. We have well over that threshold, and we have plenty of cause, which I've documented extensively." Eleanor grabbed her purse. "I'll be consulting my attorney. This isn't over." She stormed out, and I never saw her at another HOA meeting. Patricia took over immediately, and her first act as president was to rescind all fines issued during Eleanor's tenure that were deemed excessive or retaliatory. That included my $200 for the hydrants and $300 for the snow disposal, plus fines against 23 other homeowners for various petty infractions. Her second act was to form a committee to review and revise the covenant enforcement procedures. I volunteered for that committee, along with Sarah Chen, Jerry, and a few other neighbors who'd been targeted. We spent 6 weeks going through the covenant line by line, clarifying vague language and establishing clear, reasonable standards for enforcement. The fire hydrant issue got particular attention. We clarified that homeowners were responsible for clearing hydrants after snowfall, but we defined clearing in practical terms. The hydrant must be visible and accessible, with enough space for emergency personnel to connect hoses. We dropped the arbitrary 3-foot radius requirement and added a provision that homeowners would receive 1 warning before any fines were issued, with photographic evidence required for any violations. We also clarified the service road situation. Since the easement crossed multiple properties, we made it an official HOA maintenance responsibility, with costs split among all homeowners through regular dues. It was simpler and fairer than trying to coordinate 4 different property owners to maintain a 50-foot stretch of road. By March, the new enforcement procedures were drafted, reviewed by an attorney, and put to a homeowner vote. They passed with 90% approval. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In early April, I was coming home from work when I noticed a car parked in front of my house. Not Eleanor's white Lexus, but a dark blue sedan I didn't recognize. As I pulled into my driveway, a woman got out of the sedan and walked toward me. "Quentin Lancaster," she asked. "That's me." She handed me an envelope. "You've been served." My stomach dropped as I opened the envelope. Inside was a lawsuit filed by Eleanor Whitmore against me personally, alleging defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I immediately called Michelle Torres, my attorney. "She's suing me." "For what?" Michelle asked me to scan and email the complaint. I did, and she called me back within an hour. "This is a slap suit," Michelle said. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. She's trying to punish you for exercising your rights as a homeowner to challenge her authority." The good news is Pennsylvania has anti-slap statutes. The bad news is we still have to respond and defend it. How much will that cost? A few thousand for the initial response and motion to dismiss. If she pushes it further, more. But Quentin, I'm confident we'll not only get it dismissed, but also recover attorney fees from her. This suit is frivolous. Over the next month, Michelle filed our response and a motion to dismiss under Pennsylvania's anti-slap law. She argued that everything I'd done was protected activity. Attending HOA meetings, questioning enforcement decisions, and communicating with other homeowners about HOA matters. None of it constituted defamation or harassment. Eleanor's attorney, whose name was Robert Fleming, filed an opposition to our motion. His arguments were weak, relying mostly on claiming I'd damaged Eleanor's reputation by organizing a campaign to remove her from the board. The hearing on our motion to dismiss was scheduled for late May in the Dauphin County Court of Common Pleas. Michelle told me I needed to attend but probably wouldn't have to testify. The hearing was on a Wednesday afternoon. I took half a day off work and met Michelle at the courthouse. Eleanor was there with Robert Fleming, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom. She didn't look at me. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Karen Brennan. She'd read both briefs in advance and didn't seem inclined to waste time. "Mr. Fleming," she began, "I've read your complaint and your opposition to the motion to dismiss. Can you explain to me how Mr. Lancaster's participation in HOA governance activities constitutes defamation?" Fleming stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Lancaster coordinated with other homeowners to spread false and damaging statements about my client, specifically claiming she was abusing her authority and issuing retaliatory fines." "Were those statements false?" Judge Brennan asked. Fleming hesitated. "They were opinions, Your Honor, but they were stated as facts, and were they false?" The judge repeated. "They were uncharitable interpretations of my client's good faith enforcement of HOA covenants." Judge Brennan looked at Michelle. "Miss Torres, what evidence do you have regarding these enforcement actions?" Michelle stood and presented a binder to the court. "Your Honor, I've compiled all enforcement notices issued by Miss Whitmore during her tenure as HOA president, along with photographic evidence showing that violations cited against Mr. Lancaster were standard practices throughout the community that other homeowners were not cited for. I've also included minutes from HOA meetings showing that Miss Whitmore's enforcement actions were formally rescinded by the board as excessive and retaliatory." The judge flipped through the binder for several minutes. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Mr. Fleming," Judge Brennan finally said, Your client issued a $300 fine for throwing snow on a grass strip. Is that correct? That was for damaging common property, Your Honor. It's snow on grass. It melts. The judge closed the binder. Miss Torres, your motion to dismiss is granted. This suit is clearly retaliatory and lacks any merit. Mr. Fleming, I'm sanctioning your client for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Miss Torres, file a motion for attorney fees within 30 days. Fleming tried to argue, but Judge Brennan cut him off. We're done here. The suit is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Mr. Lancaster, you're free to go. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Michelle and I left the courtroom together, and I saw Eleanor in the hallway arguing with Fleming. She looked furious and defeated at the same time. What happens now? I asked Michelle. I file for attorney fees. Given the judge's ruling and the sanctions, we'll likely recover most if not all of what you've paid me, plus any additional costs if she tries to appeal, which I doubt she will. Is it really over? Michelle smiled. Unless she does something spectacularly stupid, yes. She'll have to pay your attorney fees. She's been sanctioned by the court, and if she tries anything else, we can pursue a harassment restraining order. Most people give up at this point. Michelle was right. Eleanor paid the attorney fees a month later, and I got a check reimbursing me for most of my legal costs. She never attended another HOA meeting, and by August, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd put her house up for sale. The for sale sign went up in September, and her house sold in 3 weeks. She moved out in October, and I never saw her again. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had transformed. Patricia Morrison turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement, repairing playground equipment, organizing neighborhood events, and maintaining common areas properly. The service road to the emergency generator got plowed reliably all through the following winter, and nobody got fined for having their trash cans out for 13 hours instead of 12. The revised covenant enforcement procedures worked well too. When violations did occur, they were handled with warnings first and common sense second. Jerry still parked his work truck in his driveway. Sarah Chen's vegetable garden flourished. I kept my Christmas wreath up until mid-January without harassment. The fire hydrant issue never came up again. After that first winter with Eleanor, I continued clearing them after snowstorms, but now it took however long it took, and as long as they were accessible, nobody bothered me about precise measurements or clearance radiuses. I learned a valuable lesson through all of it. HOAs are only as good or bad as the people running them. Eleanor had turned ours into a nightmare because she craved power and control. She'd used the covenant as a weapon rather than a tool for maintaining community standards. But once she was gone and reasonable people took over, the HOA returned to what it was supposed to be: a way for neighbors to work together to maintain property values and quality of life. One Saturday morning in November, almost a year after the original snowstorm that started everything, I was raking leaves in my front yard when Jerry walked over with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing me one. "Thanks, man." I took a sip and leaned on my rake. "Remember last winter?" Jerry laughed. "How could I forget? You standing up to Eleanor at that meeting was the highlight of my year. I wasn't trying to start a war. I just wanted her to be reasonable." "Yeah, well, sometimes reasonable people have to take a stand against unreasonable ones." Jerry gestured at the neighborhood around us. "Things are better now. Patricia's doing a good job. The place feels like a community again instead of a prison. True enough." "You ever regret it? All the stress and the lawsuit and everything?" I thought about it. The whole experience had been exhausting and expensive, even with the attorney fees recovery. I'd lost sleep, dealt with constant anxiety, and spent hours documenting and fighting something that never should have been a fight in the first place. But I looked around at the neighborhood. Kids were playing in the street. Neighbors were chatting over fences. Someone had put up Halloween decorations that were definitely not covenant approved, but looked great anyway. The community center was hosting a potluck dinner that evening, the first one in years, and about 50 families had signed up to attend. "No," I finally said. "I don't regret it. Someone had to stand up to her, and it might as well have been me." Jerry clinked his coffee cup against mine. "To standing up to crazy HOA presidents. I'll drink to that." That evening, I went to the potluck dinner at the community center. It was packed with neighbors I'd never really talked to before, all of them friendly and relaxed in a way that hadn't been possible under Eleanor's reign. Patricia gave a short speech thanking everyone for participating in the community, and several people came up to me throughout the evening to thank me for what I'd done. Sarah Chen cornered me near the dessert table. "You know, Quentin, you really did change things around here. Before you stood up to Eleanor, everyone was afraid. Nobody wanted to challenge her because she had all the power. But you showed us that the power actually belongs to the homeowners, not the board. The board works for us, not the other way around." "I just didn't want to pay ridiculous fines," I said, deflecting the compliment. "Maybe, but you could have just paid them and kept your head down like a lot of people would have. Instead, you fought back, and you did it the right way. You documented everything, you knew the covenant better than she did, and you got legal help when you needed it. That's how you win against bullies." She was right, I supposed. Eleanor had been a bully, using the covenant and her position to push people around. And like most bullies, she'd crumbled when someone finally pushed back. The holidays came and went peacefully. I put up my Christmas decorations without measuring their height or checking their covenant compliance. I left my wreath up until late January again. Nobody sent me any notices. When the first big snowstorm of the new winter hit in mid-January, I cleared my driveway, my sidewalk, and both fire hydrants. It took about 90 minutes, and I did a good job without obsessing over exact measurements. The hydrants were visible and accessible, which was the whole point. Later that day, I was inside warming up with hot chocolate when I saw a truck with a plow attachment driving slowly down our street. It turned onto the service road that led to the emergency generator and cleared it in about 5 minutes. The HOA had contracted with a local plow service like Dennis Kowalski had suggested, and it was working perfectly. I raised my mug of hot chocolate in a silent toast to reasonable governance and common sense prevailing. February brought another storm, and then March arrived with warming temperatures and melting snow. By April, the whole mess with Eleanor felt like it had happened years ago rather than just over a year. The neighborhood had moved on, and so had I. I did hear one more thing about Eleanor, though. Jerry ran into someone at Home Depot who knew someone who knew her. Apparently, she'd bought a condo in a downtown high-rise building with no HOA and no shared maintenance responsibilities. Just her unit, and management that handled everything else. It was probably the best outcome for everyone involved. Eleanor got to live somewhere without neighbors to police, and we got to live without her policing us. In May, the HOA held its annual meeting and elections. Patricia Morrison ran for president again and won easily. Dennis Kowalski stayed on as treasurer. They filled Eleanor's old board seat with Tom Davidson, one of the 4 homeowners whose property the service road easement crossed. Tom was a retired firefighter who'd lived in Meadowbrook for 15 years and had a reputation for being fair-minded and practical. During the meeting, Patricia presented the previous year's budget and financials. Despite paying for professional snow removal and some legal fees related to Eleanor's tenure, the HOA was actually in better financial shape than it had been the year before. Compliance with dues payments was up because people actually trusted the board again. Voluntary participation in community events was way up. Property values in the neighborhood had increased. Turns out, Patricia said with a smile, that when you treat people with respect and enforce rules fairly, they're a lot more willing to participate in the community. Who knew? Everyone laughed, including me. After the meeting, several neighbors invited me to grab drinks at a nearby bar. We sat around talking about nothing important, just normal neighborhood stuff. Someone's kid had gotten accepted to Penn State. Someone else was planning a kitchen renovation. Jerry had landed a big contracting job. Normal, boring, wonderful neighborhood conversation. At one point, someone brought up Eleanor making a joke about her reign of terror, but the conversation moved on quickly. She wasn't worth dwelling on. She was gone, the neighborhood was better, and that was all that mattered. I drove home that night feeling genuinely content. When I'd bought my house in Meadowbrook Estates 8 years earlier, I'd wanted a safe, quiet community with decent neighbors and well-maintained common areas. For most of those 8 years, that's what I'd had. Eleanor's tenure had been a nightmare, but it had also been a test of what kind of community we really were. We'd passed that test. We'd stood up to a bully, we'd followed proper procedures, and we'd come out stronger on the other side. The summer was peaceful. I spent weekends working in my yard, attending neighborhood barbecues, and helping organize a community yard sale that raised money for new playground equipment. The service road to the emergency generator got regular maintenance. The fire hydrants sat unmolested on their street corners, and nobody got fined for anything unless it was actually a problem. In August, a new family moved into Eleanor's old house. They were young, maybe early 30s, with 2 small kids and a friendly golden retriever. I went over to introduce myself the day they moved in, bringing a bottle of wine and a welcome basket. "I'm Quentin," I said. "I live across the street. Welcome to Meadowbrook." The husband, whose name was Marcus, shook my hand enthusiastically. "Thanks, man. We're excited to be here. The neighborhood seems great." "It is," I said, and I meant it. His wife, Amanda, asked about the HOA. "We've heard horror stories about HOAs from friends. How's this one?" "It's good now," I said carefully. "We had some issues with the previous president, but the current board is solid. They're fair and reasonable. Just pay your dues on time, keep your property maintained, and you'll be fine." "That's good to hear," Marcus said. "The previous owner mentioned something about the HOA having drama, but she didn't give details." I smiled. "Ancient history. You'll like it here." And they did. By September, Marcus and Amanda and their kids were regular fixtures at neighborhood events. Their golden retriever became friends with half the dogs in the community. Their kids played with other neighborhood kids. They were exactly the kind of neighbors you wanted. Friendly, responsible, and normal. One Sunday morning in October, I was washing my car in the driveway when Marcus came over. "Hey, Quentin, can I ask you something?" "Sure, what's up?" "I got a notice from the HOA about our fence needing repair. There's a broken board on the back fence near the property line. They gave me 30 days to fix it and offered to help me find a contractor if I needed one. Is that normal?" "Yeah, that's how it works now. As long as you fix it within the time frame, there's no problem. If you need more time, just email the board and explain why. They're pretty understanding." Marcus looked relieved. "Okay, good. I was worried it was going to be some huge thing." "We're planning to fix it next weekend anyway. That'll be fine. Patricia's good about this stuff. She used to be a teacher, so she's good at being firm but fair." The previous owner, Eleanor, she was the one you guys had trouble with, right? I hesitated, then decided honesty was better. Yeah. She took things too far, got too rigid about enforcement. But that's done now. The neighborhood voted her out, she moved away, and things have been good since. Marcus nodded slowly. Amanda found some old HOA emails from a neighborhood forum when we were researching the area. Sounds like it got pretty intense. It did for a while, but we handled it and the community's stronger for it. Good to know. Thanks for being straight with me. After Marcus went back to his house, I thought about Eleanor again. Not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of distant curiosity. I wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience, if she'd reflected on how her need for control had destroyed her standing in the community and eventually driven her out. Probably not, I decided. People like Eleanor rarely learned those lessons. They just found new situations where they could exert control, or they retreated into isolation where they didn't have to deal with other people challenging them. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. As fall turned to winter, I prepared for snow season again. I made sure my snowblower was serviced and ready. I bought a new snow shovel to replace my old one that had cracked last winter. I stocked up on ice melt and made sure I had good gloves and boots. When the first snow came in early December, I cleared everything just like I had for years. Driveway, sidewalk, front walk, and both fire hydrants. It took about 2 hours and I did a thorough job. The hydrants were visible and accessible. The snow was properly disposed of in my yard and on the grass strip between the sidewalk and street, just like everyone else did. No notices appeared on my door. No fines arrived in the mail. No Eleanor showed up with her clipboard and her measuring tape and her impossible standards. Just a quiet, snowy neighborhood where people took care of their properties and looked out for each other and lived their lives without unnecessary drama. The service road to the emergency generator got plowed that same afternoon by the HOA's contracted service. I watched the truck drive past my house, turn onto the service road and clear it in minutes. The system was working exactly as it should. That evening I sat in my living room with a fire in the fireplace, a glass of bourbon in my hand, and a sense of peace that had been missing during Eleanor's tenure. My house was warm. My driveway was clear. My community was functional and friendly. Everything was as it should be. I thought about that first morning when Eleanor had appeared at my door with her clipboard and her demands about the fire hydrants. If I'd known then what was coming, all the stress and conflict and legal battles, would I have just complied and avoided the whole mess? Maybe. But probably not. Because compliance with unreasonable demands just encourages more unreasonable demands. Eleanor would have kept pushing until someone pushed back, and it happened to be me. And in the end, I hadn't just stood up for myself. I'd stood up for Jerry and Sarah Chen and Patricia Morrison, and everyone else in the neighborhood who deserved to live without being harassed over snow disposal and mailbox angles and wreath timing. The next morning, I went outside to find Marcus and Amanda's kids building a snowman on their front lawn. The snowman was massive, probably 6 feet tall and slightly crooked. The kids had dressed it in an old scarf and hat and given it stick arms that stuck out at odd angles. Under Eleanor's regime, that snowman would have gotten a notice for violating aesthetic standards or being too close to the street or something equally ridiculous. Under Patricia's leadership, it was just a snowman built by happy kids in a friendly neighborhood. I waved to Marcus, who was supervising from his porch. He waved back. "Nice snowman," I called. "Thanks. The kids worked really hard on it. It looks great." And it did. It looked exactly like what a neighborhood should be. Kids playing, families enjoying winter, People living their lives without fear of citation or fine or harassment. That's what I'd fought for, I realized. Not just my right to clear snow my own way or to avoid unreasonable fines. I'd fought for the right of everyone in Meadowbrook Estates to live normally, to enjoy their homes, to be part of a community instead of subjects of a tyrant. As I stood there in the cold December morning, watching kids play in the snow and neighbors clearing their driveways and life happening naturally and peacefully, I felt genuinely grateful for how everything had turned out. Eleanor was gone. The HOA was functional. The community was healthy. And I'd learned that sometimes standing up to bullies, even when it's hard and stressful and expensive, is the right thing to do. Not because you'll necessarily win, though in this case I had, but because letting bullies win without a fight just makes them stronger and bolder and more willing to push other people around. Someone had to be willing to say no, to draw a line, to fight back. This time it was me. Next time, in some other neighborhood or workplace or community, it would be someone else. But as long as people were willing to stand up to unreasonable authority, there was hope. I went inside, made breakfast, and started my day. The fire hydrants were clear. The generator had access. The neighborhood was at peace. And I was exactly where I wanted to be, home. 3 years have passed since Eleanor's departure, and Meadowbrook Estates has become the kind of community I'd hoped for when I first moved in. The playground got new equipment. The retention pond was cleaned and restocked with fish. The community center hosts events almost every month, from movie nights to craft fairs to holiday parties. I'm still in the same house. Jerry's still my neighbor. Sarah Chen is now on the HOA board. Patricia Morrison is in her 3rd term as president, running unopposed each time. The service road to the emergency generator gets maintained regularly. The fire hydrants get cleared after every snowstorm by whoever lives nearest to them, without fines or threats or precise measurement requirements. Things just work the way they're supposed to work. And every time it snows, I think about Eleanor and her clipboard and her impossible standards. And then I clear my driveway and my hydrants and I go inside to warm up, grateful that common sense ultimately prevailed over petty tyranny. That's the thing about HOAs. They're not inherently good or bad. They're just tools, and like any tool, they can be used constructively or destructively depending on who's holding them. We got lucky. We got the tool away from someone who was using it as a weapon and gave it to people who use it to build and maintain and improve. Not every HOA story ends that well, I know. But ours did, and I'm grateful for it every single day.